All right, Alexander, we've got Macron and Putin. They are going to be talking. They're going to be talking a lot about NATO, European security, and the imminent, any day now, according to Jake Sullivan, any day now, the invasion into Ukraine. Actually, he said it could happen any day now, or it can happen in a couple of weeks. You know, he's like, hey, who knows when it could happen? And that was Jake Sullivan. Anyway, you have Macron, who has turned out to be the adult in the room. He has turned out to be the adult in the room, and he wants to meet with Vladimir Putin, and he wants to talk about what's going on and what they need to do in order to make Europe stable and secure. Here's a quote from Macron. He said, quote, "The geopolitical objective of Russia today is clearly not Ukraine, but to clarify the rules of cohabitation with NATO and the EU." Macron is without a doubt the most rational and level-headed leader right now in Europe, of a major power in Europe, or in the West for that matter. You know, I never thought I would say those words, but there you have it.
I never thought I would say that. I mean, what a thing to say. And that perhaps tells you how abysmal the quality of leadership in the West has become, that we have to say that Macron is the only adult in the room. I mean, it tells you so much about the disastrous quality of leadership that Macron shines at this particular time. But of course he's right. And, you know, let's also say this, it takes some courage to say that. I mean, this is what he's just said in this long interview he's given. It's absolute heresy. I mean, the United States, the West, the British, all of them, I mean, what they're talking incessantly about is Ukraine. They don't want to talk about the fact that the Russians are seeking these security guarantees and are seeking some kind of relationship with NATO, and they want NATO to keep away from their western borders and things of that kind. And here we see Macron contradicting them. He's saying the problem isn't Ukraine at all. He's also fairly confident, if you actually drill through his comments, that there isn't going to be this mythological Russian invasion of Ukraine. And he's clearly going to Moscow, and he's working towards some kind of a deal. Now, that is really extraordinary, and it suggests a political leader who has at least kept some grasp of reality, which no one else has. Now, I have to say, if he comes back with a deal from, you know, even the outlines of a deal with the Russians, the anger in the West, amongst some people, amongst the neocons in London and Washington and Brussels, is just going to be an extraordinary thing to see. But again, I can't imagine that Macron is doing this all by himself. He's been very careful to say that he's consulting widely. He has had a call with Biden. Of course, I don't know how much Biden understands what's going on, but presumably and eventually he's discussed this with the Germans. I've no doubt at all that he's talked about this with Italy, with Draghi and people there. And if there's a deal done, which moves the situation, the dial further towards the Russians getting these legally binding security guarantees that they're looking for, which is what Macron's words suggest, then, well, we have advanced towards some small steps, not huge steps, but some small steps towards securing peace in Europe. And that would be thanks to Monsieur Macron. I mean, you know, it astonishes me to say this, but that's what it looks like.
Well, if he gets the deal, does the U.S. and the U.K., and I put both of them together, do they have to abide by some sort of security agreement or deal? Can they just tell, is it possible that they tell Macron and the French, you know what, we don't care what deal you've ironed out, you've hammered out with Putin, we don't recognize it? Is that a possibility?
Absolutely.
And if that does happen, if that does happen, then you see a very clear fracture of the Anglosphere and I guess you would say the rest of the world, in essence. Absolutely. I mean, that is what you get, in essence.
Well, indeed, absolutely. I mean, somebody referred to it, the Carolinian Core, France, Germany, Italy, and against the Anglosphere and some of the East European states, the Baltic states and Poland, and to some extent Romania too. Right. What
Yeah, but you also have like South America, for example, has thrown their hand into it. And they're saying we're on the side of a deal. We want a deal.
Absolutely, and importantly, so is India. And remember, the United States is trying to draw India into its alliance system. But, I mean, the Indians have now come out unequivocally, and they support a deal along exactly the kind of lines that Macron seems to be looking for. So, absolutely, the Anglosphere and its Eastern European allies, the Balts and all the rest, would be very isolated in the situation. But there would be uproar. I mean, if Macron comes forward with some kind of a deal along the lines that are being indicated, no further eastward expansion of NATO, for example, some kind of broader arrangement to reconstruct a European security architecture which involves Russia. The Americans and the British especially, would be furious. I mean, I'm already looking forward to the debate in the House of Commons and all these agitated MPs, Conservative and Labour MPs, are going to be jumping up and down, talking about, the European betrayal of Eastern Europe and Ukraine and all of that sort of thing. But France does have veto power over NATO's eastward expansion. Article 10 of the Washington Treaty is absolutely clear about this. France also has veto power over EU expansion. Again, all the founding documents of the European Union are unanimous about this. It would have this backing of other EU states. And yes, the Americans and the British could go round it. They could try, for example, and reach parallel independent security arrangements with Ukraine, which, go round NATO. But I have to say, those would look very fragile and very precarious. And one would sense that in that kind of situation, if the French and the Germans were unhappy about them, those security arrangements might not be particularly effective. And it would create problems between the United States and its European allies, which would, I suspect, deepen. It's also, by the way, contrary to the entire direction of diplomacy at the moment, because the United States is at the same time telling everybody that it wants to try finding some kind of way of addressing Russia's security concerns. Its written replies to Russia seem to suggest that. If it now tries to go round any French veto to try and include Ukraine in some kind of parallel alliance system, then it would appear not the stabilizer in Europe, but the disruptor, and it would lend force to the Russian point that it's the Americans who are being treacherous and unhelpful and who are the real problem in Europe. Besides which, as I said, I mean, how do you stabilize Ukraine? How do you build Ukraine into this alliance system if you don't do it alongside the Europeans? It's inconceivable to me that it could work.
How can the U.S. Damage France if they do have a deal with Russia? So there's going to be an uproar. And they're going to be in the U.S. The neocons are going to be furious, right? In the U.S. and in the U.K., they're going to be furious. Yeah. What can they do to damage France? How can they go after France? You mentioned Italy may be on side with France. I'm sure they're going to try to convince Germany to not be on side with France. Italy is led by Draghi. Draghi's not exactly the most loyal of. Let me put it this way: he can easily be swayed and bought off to the U.S.'s side, I imagine. How would they go about punishing France if France does decide to do this? And who can France go to? Who can France turn to?
Well, indeed. I mean, France.
Turkey is arming Ukraine with drones. I'm trying to figure out who would France look to in NATO or in Europe to shore up their position.
Well, indeed. I mean, I should say, just briefly on the topic of Turkey, I mean, we should actually do a program about this because, of course, Erdogan went to Kiev, and it's clear that he's now spooked because he did this deal with Ukraine, which has been in the pipeline for a while. He was saying continuously that this isn't directed against Russia. Russians aren't going to be impressed by that. But he was also unbelievably critical of the United States and said that it's the United States that's creating all the trouble between Ukraine and Russia, and that they need to calm down and stop talking in this way, and that the way forward is for some kind of reconciliation between Russia and Ukraine. And he seemed to be watering down even his talk about Ukraine joining NATO. So he's actually pulling back a bit. That was my impression anyway of Erdogan in Kiev. So it's not inconceivable that Erdogan will support Macron, and it's not. And of course, he's trying to get an invitation accepted by Putin to visit Ankara in later this month. So Turkey is very much a country in play. But let's focus on France. Now, the immediate problem the United States, the Anglosphere, would face is that if Macron did this deal with the Russians, it would be massively popular in France. I mean, there isn't going to be opposition to it anywhere in France. Some people, the people who write for Le Monde, the Le Monde readership, people like Bernard Levy, those sort of people wouldn't be happy. But the critical mass of French society, the people in the La France Profonde, the yellow vest side of French society, but also the business community, they would support it. So it'd be very, very difficult to organise some kind of protest against this policy in France. And you could try and peel off other European states, but as you rightly said, Mario Draghi, you can perhaps buy off. But again, Italian society would back this move by Macron. He would have a lot of support in France, in Italy. He would have a lot of support in Spain. He would have a lot of support in Germany. There would be a lot of support in Europe for this. So I'm going to make a suggestion. If you really want to try to put pressure on the Europeans, because it would have to be the Europeans, it wouldn't, the Carolinian core, in other words, the Central European states. You couldn't just pick off France in isolation. You'd have to go against Europe as a whole. And how would you do it? Well, I'm going to suggest this. You'd go after the euro. It's the only way I can think of. You'd start to work against the euro. But of course, the euro is the way in which you've tied Europe together and kept Europe on side. So if you untie the euro, and the euro is incredibly brittle, and of course it'll be interesting to see how it survives and copes with this era of high interest rates, which is coming, and high inflation, which is coming. So it could be under enormous pressure anyway. But of course, if you break the euro, well, the British might be happy. But does that really work in the interests of the deep state in the United States? Perhaps, perhaps not. So they have difficult decisions to make, but I would not be surprised if over the course of this year we start to see a concerted attack on the euro.
Wow, that would be something. All right. That's how much they hate Russia. They'll even sink the euro.
I know. Well, this is it. I mean,
yeah.
smash up all the furniture in your own room. Out of, throw a tantrum, break everything. But if they go after that, if they smash the euro, well, I won't be sorry. I'll be absolutely delighted. Who would benefit? Not the US. It'd be the Russians. It'd be the Germans. It would be all kinds of people. People of Europe would benefit. France would benefit. France would do a lot better with its own currency.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, the Russians are I wanted to say the Ukrainians are getting smashed without the Russians having to do anything by the propaganda being put out by by the Biden White House. I mean, they're sinking Ukraine and they're sinking the Ukraine economy with zero invasion going on.
Well, I know.
So I mean, everything they do is just working against them.
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely hilarious because, of course, the Russians have denied incessantly, they're continuously denying that they have any plan to invade Ukraine. And yet they haven't moved a single tank across the Ukrainian border. They haven't even moved any tanks to the Ukrainian border. And yet we have a crisis which is sinking Ukraine. And of course, if this deal is done between Macron and Putin along the lines that we've indicated, well, thank you, Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Blinken and all of the rest, because the hysteria that you will have engendered will have created the first step towards the dismantling of the NATO system in Europe. We discussed this in a previous program, but that would be the effect. If you want to talk about a debacle, as I said, this would be one on an epic scale. And in the meantime, this isolated man, this, rogue figure, this demented tin pot dictator ruling the country with the economy the size of the Galapagos Islands. He's been visited by the French president, the German president, the Argentine president. He's meeting the Chinese leader. Biden wants to have another summit meeting. What does that tell you?
Yeah. Just real quick on a side note, you were mentioning the not moving a tank or the troops about to invade. They've now been trying to put out satellite images of the Russian army amassed at the border. It's like you say, they always put the images, but they crop out everything else. But when you look at the images, you sit there, you say, okay, you're showing me images of military equipment and military personnel in barracks. So I imagine the Russians have a lot of bases and a lot of barracks in and around their own country, specifically in and around Belarus and Ukraine. It's like the equivalent of saying, you know what, the United States is about to invade Mexico, and I've got the satellite images to show the military bases in Texas.
Yes.
Here they are. Yep. Here are the military bases in Texas, and this is proof that they're going to invade Mexico. It's crazy stuff.
It is crazy stuff. And all I would say is, these satellite pictures don't actually tell us anything. All they tell us is that Russia has an army in Russia. That's all these pictures actually show. They don't tell us that there's an invasion. And notice also that the date of the invasion is always changing. So, in November it was going to be in December, and then it was going to be in January, and now it's going to be at the end of February.
2 weeks to flatten the curve.
And then there's already talk about March. And I even read somewhere in some place suggesting it will happen in June. And then when, June comes, it'll be, presumably November.
It'll be too hot.
It'll be too hot, exactly. Well, quite.
It'll be too hot in June. Yeah. It's too cold now, but June will be too hot.
Absolutely. And, the imminent invasion, actually the invasion isn't imminent, but it could happen any day. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen immediately. Kiev would fall in 5 days, or is it 2 days, or 5 hours? But we mustn't worry, because there'll be this massive uprising of the people of Ukraine. They'll be going out with javelin missiles in their millions to fight against man-pads. They're going to take on the Russian army all by themselves. This whole thing has a demented quality. And who's winning? Who is gaining from all of this? As I said, the Russians are. Putin is. As I said, everybody's coming to see him. Macron is coming, talking about, changing Europe's architecture. Olaf Scholz is following in a few days. They're all coming to see Putin. So he doesn't have to move a tank. He doesn't have to make a single threat, because Jake Sullivan is doing all the hard work for him. Thank you, Jake Sullivan.
Thank you, Jake Sullivan. We'll leave it there. Guys, you'll find a link up top. If you're watching this on Rumble, you'll find a link up top. It is two locals. It's a little maroon red button. which will take you to our locals community, directly to our locals community. They are integrated, Rumble and locals. So in our locals community, you will get all kinds of great news and exclusive videos and all kinds of great content, not only from us, but also from community members as well. It's the only news feed you need to start your day, to end your day. Just go to our locals page and you'll get all kinds of great news. Geopolitical news is all there. It is all there in a timeline format. Just click that button on top if you are watching from Rumble. ODYSEE, SuperU, and BitChute. Those are also platforms where you can find our videos and 10% off. Duran shop, use the code GOODDAY and you'll get 10% off all merch. There is the mug, the magic mug with Good Day. Take care.